Hi, and welcome to part 2 of our summer bonus episodes of the Horn Call podcast. As I mentioned in episode 1, which if you haven't listened to it, you can go back and do so if you like. These are a series of panel discussions from IHS 40 in 2008, hosted by Susan McCulloch and Jesse McCormick at the Lamont School of Music in Denver, Colorado. And these panel discussions were organized by IHS honorary member Douglas Hill, and they're just a gold mine of information. And speaking of gold mines, I would suggest that you go visit the symposium highlights page on the IHS website. I'll put a link to that in the show description. You'll hear from Dr. Lynn Folk, who is a professor at Western Michigan University. Along with myself, we are former students of Douglas Hill. You'll also hear from Professor Pat Hughes from University of Texas at Austin, another Doug Hill student. And you'll hear from Dr. Catherine Roche-Wallace from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, a colleague of mine from the state of Louisiana. So I hope you enjoy this second episode in our summer bonus series of the Horn Call podcast.
Hello, I'd like to start by saying that I'm honored to be part of this panel and thrilled to have the opportunity to share this book, The Courage to Teach by Parker Palmer, with you and share some of the ideas that I got out of this book with you and compare that to horn pedagogy. I've created a handout, and in that handout I've organized some of the quotes that I felt were most relevant to today's discussion. And I just want to make sure that if you haven't received a handout, you might want to get one so that you can follow along with the discussion a little bit better. This book was written in 1998, and a new edition just came out earlier this year, a 10th anniversary edition. And as I said, I've included quotes in your handout, and I've organized them into 4 separate categories. And I'll start with the introduction here. I won't read the quotes to you, but I want to summarize this very opening quote because I think this really summarizes what this book is about. I am a teacher at heart, and there are moments in the classroom when I can hardly hold the joy. But at other moments, the classroom is so lifeless or painful or confused, and I am so powerless to do anything about it, that my claim to be a teacher seems a transparent sham. If you are a teacher who never has bad days or who has them but does not care, this book is not for you. This book is for teachers who have good days and bad, and whose bad days bring the suffering that comes only from something one loves. And just to comment on that, I think this book is also about honoring those people for whom teaching is their vocation or calling. And what I want to talk about today are not just techniques on how to teach the high register and how to teach lip trills and that kind of thing, but more a philosophical foundation for teaching. And that's where I think this book can be really helpful for us, is grounding our teaching in a more honest and in a more in a foundation that has maybe a little bit more integrity and teaches us about ourselves. In professional situations, I am frequently confronted with and struggle with the old idea that those who can do, those who can't teach. In a recent experience, a conductor told me that I was good enough to have a playing job, as if my decision to be a professor from the beginning of my professional career was a compromise to my playing career. Also, when I tell members of my community that I am a horn professor, more often than not, the second question is, do you play in the local symphony? As if teaching isn't enough. There's a tension between those who identify themselves as performers who teach versus those who identify themselves as teachers who perform. There is an implicit hierarchy in this tension. My decision to pursue a teaching career was a conscious and intentional one, not a sellout decision. Those who profess to teach are an important part of music education and in keeping classical music alive. In the second section, in which I've organized the quotes, I talk about seeking questions, not necessarily answers, in our discoveries. To summarize the quotes, The subjects we teach are as large and complex as life, so our knowledge of them is always flawed and partial. No matter how we devote ourselves to reading and research, teaching requires a command of content that always eludes our grasp. And truth is an eternal conversation about things that matter, conducted with passion and discipline. And in my commentary on these quotes, as a new young college horn professor, I often feel as though my job is to know all the answers and make no mistakes in transmitting these absolute answers to my students. I take my role as a mentor and teacher to young musicians very seriously, but I know my job is not to know everything. That's not possible. It is to be a resource for students by staying connected to the professional world and being aware of new resources, and by using my experiences to help them in their own quest for musical knowledge. My job is to point them in the direction of the information in which they are seeking, and to inspire and motivate them to further develop as musicians. In lessons and studio classes, I plant seeds and wait for the opportunity to nurture and develop that idea when the student is ready, which can be anywhere from a few days to a few years. It's to engage in a give and take with the student, sometimes presenting information and ideas, and other times being receptive and open to exploring other student-initiated ideas. Sometimes these opportunities for teaching come at unexpected moments, and students approach me as if I'm a walking library. For example, oftentimes when I'm on my way to checking my mailbox or teaching another class or going home for the evening, a student will stop me in the hallway and ask, I've been meaning to ask you this. How can I improve my high range? As if there was a quick, easy answer to this question, as if I had a magical phrase, handout, software, program, or a pill in my bag that I could just give them at that moment. Even though this is challenging, I try to be as resourceful as possible in these inconvenient moments, because it is important that the question is student-initiated. To pretend that teachers know or are supposed to know everything and are superhuman or godlike, as much as we hate to admit this as teachers, is to deny our own human imperfection and transience. Teachers are more educated and more experienced than students, and as such are qualified to nurture students into better horn playing. If teachers are allowed to be honest with themselves and their students, the exciting process of learning and improvement can be a satisfying experience for everyone. In the third section, I've organized some of his quotations into a section called Vulnerability, We Teach Who We Are. My ability to connect to my students and to connect them with the subject depends less on the methods I use than on the degree to which I know and trust my selfhood, and I'm willing to make it available and vulnerable in the service of learning. Teaching is a daily exercise in vulnerability. I need not reveal personal secrets to feel naked in front of a class or in a one-on-one situation with a student. I need only parse a sentence or work a proof on the board or miss a note in a demonstration, or we can all think of ways in which we may look foolish while my students doze off or pass notes. No matter how technical my subject may be, the things I teach are things I care about, and what I care about helps define my selfhood. And my commentary on this: teaching from our true selves does indeed take courage. Teachers are human, and the act of teaching forces them to know themselves intimately, facing those issues in oneself that might be unbearable. The reward is a deeper relationship with students and the possibility of greater learning and self-knowledge and understanding. It also forces teachers to know the subject more intimately when teachers continue to learn about the subject. Admitting when we are wrong or don't know the answer as teachers is extremely challenging in an environment where students expect teachers to know all the answers. But we are committing ourselves to truth when we accept our own shortcomings and work to overcome those shortcomings. In my experience, the teaching atmosphere is more honest and I think healthier if the student trusts that the teacher is being honest and truthful with his or her best interests in mind. And I think we're giving students an important gift when they learn that, given the resources, they have the power to solve their own playing challenges. Students who accept responsibility for their learning gain so much more from the process. And in the final section, on the back page of your handout, I have included two diagrams that Parker Palmer has included in this book. And he talks about an old paradigm of teaching and a new paradigm of teaching. And in the old paradigm of teaching, the object or the subject would be transmitted to the expert, and notice that the arrows go one direction, and then the expert transmits that information to the amateur or the student. And notice that there are baffles at all of those intersections, as if information can't possibly go the other direction. And of course, I think we're working more in a new paradigm now, and that's what my goal is that the subject is in the center of our learning experience and our learning environments. And the knower is all around that. And the knower feeds into the subject, which also feeds into the knower, and it's a more cyclical kind of process instead of information just moving in one direction. In the old paradigm, teaching is considered a set of techniques used by a master teacher to indoctrinate clueless students. However, we now know that knowledge is not a thing that is transmitted from expert to student, but rather a conversation of ideas that leads to greater understanding and change or improvement. It's motivated by a mutual passion for the subject. We can't solve a student's high register, but we have a bank of experiences and techniques from which we can help the student discover his or her own path to a solution. Effective teaching is less about the teacher and his or her professional stories and experiences, and more about how the teacher uses those experiences judiciously to help students work through particular concepts. This takes patience and a strong ego that doesn't prey on students for self-worth or self-affirmation. The new paradigm needs to be taught and advocated to students. It's a foreign concept to many who come from high school programs that teach in the old paradigm and force students to be passive learners. I think Doug Hill's chapter, The Responsible Student, in his book, Collected Thoughts, is a terrific resource for teaching students about this new paradigm in Horn teaching. And then I just have a couple closing remarks. I have read this book 3 times in the last 10 years. First, as an eager graduate student and aspiring professional teacher. Second, as a first-year full-time faculty member. And third, as part of a campus-wide book discussion group after having taught for several years in a university setting. The first 2 times I read it, I was nervous and self-conscious as a teacher, and I had a lot of self-doubt. I was comforted by Palmer's approach, and he gave me hope that maybe I could be an effective teacher after all one day. His approach seemed like a more honest way to teach students than what I had experienced in a few situations in my student years. However, while this approach seemed right in theory, I wondered if it would compromise my authority and effectiveness in a real teaching situation. I wondered if it would work in real life. This doubt and self-consciousness hadn't completely gone away by the 3rd reading, but I can say now that I see the positive results of this kind of approach on my own students in their positive attitudes, confidence levels, creativity, self-motivation, and sense of curiosity. And I'm confident that his ideas can actually work in the real world in Horn pedagogy. Thank you.
The book that I'm going to talk about is called Don't Shoot the Dog, The New Art of Teaching and Training. This book you can get for like $2.50 on the internet. It's been around for a long time. It was first published in 1984 and then revised in 1999. It's a book that I read with my students last semester as part of our ongoing Book of the Semester Club. I heard about this book from my friend and esteemed colleague Kelly Driftmeyer, who is the horn professor up at SUNY Potsdam. She and I were judging at the International Horn Competition of America last summer, and we were having coffee talking about this and that, and we found out that we both have Book of the Month clubs with our students, and this is a book that she told me about, and she was very excited about it because she loves animals, and so it was very a direct line for her. But I got so excited hearing Kelly talk about it that I just simply had to read it, and so I went home and ordered it, and as soon as I read it, I knew that I simply had to share it with my students. And I hope that after you hear about it today, that you'll want to go read it too, because it's really fun. Karen Pryor is the author of the book, and she is a behavioral biologist and has spent a lot of her experience training animals. She's trained all kinds of animals, dolphins, whales, horses, cats, dogs, ferrets, llamas, mongoose, or mongooses. I don't know which one it is, but you name it. She has trained these animals, and the book is full of stories of her trying to get these animals to do different things. And it's a very, very fun read, just from all these little stories. But that's not really the main point of her book. The point is that we can use the methods that animal trainers use with animals to shape other people's behavior. And with animals, negative reinforcement isn't really successful. A dolphin doesn't understand it when you scowl. But if you throw a fish to the dolphin after it jumps to the hoop, the dolphin understands that. That's a positive reinforcement. And I guess her premise is that we can use a lot more positive methods than negative methods to get desired behavior. She also talks about punishment as one method of shaping someone's behavior. And punishment is usually something that's given after the bad act has happened. And in animal training, that's proved not to be an effective reinforcer at all. That the most effective reinforcement happens right when the action is taking place. You see how this is very interesting for the college professor, the horn professor who's sitting there next to his student, giving all of these signals of reinforcement. Smiles, nods, shrugs, raised eyebrows. Those are all types of reinforcement, and how you give the reinforcement can help shape the behavior. Without going into too much detail, she talks about different kinds of reinforcement, and then she goes on to talk about 8 different methods of shaping someone's behavior, and they're on the handout that you can see. I'll kind of quickly I talked about a couple of them. The first one I have to talk about because that's where the title of the book came from. If your dog isn't going to run and get the bone when you throw it, you shoot him. That will stop the behavior of the dog not going to get the bone. You understand it? So that's the worst kind of negative reinforcement you can give anything. And you can translate that into human stuff too. If the marriage isn't working, you get a divorce. You've ended the whole thing. Well, you haven't really ended anything when you get a divorce, but you moved on. But you can see how you moved on there. She focuses more on the methods 5 through 8, which tend to be more positive. Some of the ones I know that you probably think you already use, especially number 7. I think as horn professors, when a student has too much tension, it doesn't work to talk about releasing the tension or getting rid of the tension. It's better to tell them, why don't you think about your air and blow? You talk about something else, and hopefully that will go around it and get them to release the tension anyway. So this book is really interesting, talking about all these different kinds. And in the book, she goes through 8 different, I think it's 10 different scenarios, like improving your tennis swing, how to get the kids to be quiet in the van when you're driving across the country, when they're screaming, or how to get your mother-in-law to stop talking to you when are calling you all the time. And she goes through each one of these methods and applies the method and says how you could shape that person's behavior using this method or this method or this method. So you kind of get to learn all the different methods pretty well. And in terms of the studio setting, there's a couple different applications that are real obvious to me. One is that just an understanding and overall awareness of how behavior can be shaped. And it's really great for students to understand that too. Learning to incorporate more positive methods of reinforcement is wonderful. It seems funny when you think about when we go into the practice room to practice, we're looking for all the negative things. We're looking for us to mess up. That's what we're looking for, and then we're going to fix it. Why don't you look for the things that you did that were great? And after you do something great, say, that was great. We don't do that. We should be doing that more often, I'm telling you. You can shape students' practicing behaviors just by giving them some of these tools that are in the book so that when they go out into the practice room, they're able to sit beside themselves and be a positive reinforcer or be a trainer. In some instances, you can even shape a certain aspect of horn playing. I did this as an experiment with 2 of my students with lip trills. I have this little exercise that I actually learned from Doug a long time ago that he doesn't use anymore, I think. But it's just a short little lip trill exercise, and you use a metronome, and you practice it very slowly. And if you do it right, you move it up, and you move it up, and you move it up, and you try to get to a certain. You get the exercise up to around 200, and then you take the metronome away, and it sounds like a real lip trill, whether you can lip trill or not. But I had 2 students volunteer to do lip trill training, and I teach lessons that are 50 minutes long, and I have a little 10-minute slot in between each lesson to kind of regroup and make notes and stuff. But I had 2 students come in every day for only 5 minutes during one of those slots, and I trained them on lip trills, and I had my metronome, and I would say, good. Good. And I didn't allow them to practice the lip trills outside of the lesson because you don't allow a dog to practice practice their training outside. They just were coming for 5 minutes and they would play the lip trills and come back the next day. And I'm telling you, both of them have amazing lip trills. In 2 weeks, one of them flipped into natural lip trills after 4 days. And they had both been trying this exercise that I had given them on their own in the practice room for over a year. But it was the idea that there was someone there going, yes. And that's the other really big revelation I had reading this book, is that if you think about sports and how athletes are trained, there's always a coach present. Think of Wimbledon. Who's in the VIP box? The trainer, the coach. They're always there. Those are professionals. They're making lots of money. And so they're always getting coached. The basketball team never practices as a basketball team without the coach or one of the assistant coaches watching. There's always training. There's always reinforcement going on. When we're practicing, when we go into the lesson for 1 hour a week, we have our trainer there, and then we're off into the abyss of your own thing, you know? And so it's really important that you learn how to train yourself, and that you learn how to train yourself to practice in the right way. And I think that was the hugest reinforcement, thing that hit me at this book. And the last thing, oh no, I said that. So I think that's all I have to say. I really enjoyed this book, and I hope that you enjoy it too, and I hope you go read it. Thank you.
This book has completely revolutionized the way many educators think about teaching today. Think for a moment, all of you. How do you define intelligence? Gardner asks us to forget intelligence as a single quantitative property. You're either really intelligent or not so much. Instead, he wants us to consider these end states that various societies value. If you have an ability to create something, to change something, then you have an intelligence. So, Gardner has defined intelligence as the ability to solve problems or produce something that is valued by society. I bet that's pretty different from what you thought intelligence was just a second ago. Gardner has defined 7 intelligences. He actually found a new one, the naturalist intelligence, but I only get 10 minutes, so we're going to talk about 7. And those are linguistic, logical mathematical, musical, intra and interpersonal, spatial, and bodily kinesthetic. Today, I'd like to take you quickly through each intelligence, the strengths a student possesses if this is their intelligence, some evidence to look for and listen for in your students to see if this is their go-to strength, and also some teaching techniques that I've come up with for a Horn student with that intelligence. So let's start with linguistic intelligence. Gardner defines linguistic intelligence as the capacity to use words effectively, whether orally or in writing, as well as a sensitivity to those sounds and rhythms and meanings of words. Some things a linguistic student might say, they might talk about a book that they're reading right now. They walk in, put their horn case down, they also put a book down next to it. They might tell you that they listen to words in their head as they're reading them or jotting them on paper. One giveaway in my lecture class is if I see a student's lips moving while they're reading, that's a pretty good chance that student's linguistic. They might say that they learn more by listening than they do by watching and listening. We had kind of an uproar in my graduate class. I had a student who didn't take a single note of the whole entire lecture. Got A's on all the exams, and all of his colleagues wanted to know how the heck he had done that. Well, he was a linguistic student. He processed the information as I was saying it. If he had written it down, it would have disrupted that process for him. I enjoy many different kinds of word games. We were doing crossword puzzles on the flight in, so I definitely have a linguistic student in my studio. English and social studies are an easier subject for me to do well in than math or science. In the Horn studio, sometimes the math classes can be the bane of our existence. Here's some ways I found to really appeal to these students. And it's not that this is the only way you can reach them, it's just that this is their preferred method of learning. You're really going to kind of pique their interest if you try to use some of these things. Number one, and everyone in my studio does this, we keep a practice or a lesson journal, and some people have both. And especially for these linguistic students, if you can make a special note of those words that click If you say a word and the light bulb goes on and the right thing comes out of the horn, that's an important word to write down for that student. Record those lessons, and not necessarily videotaping, although that's pretty easy to do, but they need to hear both what you say and what they said in return, and then what came out of the horn as a result of that. I've made writing assignments on technique elements. We go into the Farkas book and we use our good freshman composition skills and, summarize or paraphrase what Mr. Farkas had to say about high range, about trills, things like that. And this is a really good one, and I use this one too. My students know I do. Write single word cues on scores like breathe, crescendo, and it helps if it's one word. And boy, the effect is just amazing. All right, our next intelligence, logical, mathematical. Gardner defines this as the capacity to use numbers effectively and to reason well. And also these students have a sensitivity to logical patterns and relationships, and they also have, those folks that can really see that function, that you go from this to this to this, the process. Logical students can really see and work within that. Some evidence for you to find your logical mathematical people. They may tell you that they can add numbers up in their head. They may be the folks that have absolutely no problem with math and science as they go through the curriculum. These are the guys that have the Sudoku books when you walk past them in the hallway or they're in the lunchroom. They've got those books of Sudoku. They believe that almost anything has a rational explanation behind it. And sometimes these guys are your good excuse makers too. So there's always a double-edged sword with these intelligences. Your students may be most at ease when something has been measured or quantified in some way. And so I bet you know what makes them more comfortable. For my logical mathematical students, a lot of them are male. I know some people are starting to think, are some of these things gender-based, but I've had one or two females that were absolutely, this was their go-to intelligence. For these folks, it's really important to keep a practice log, and yes, they're logging minutes, but make sure you emphasize it should be quality minutes, right? Just going from A to Z doesn't get a whole lot done. Assign them exercises with a number of quality repeats. My major professor, Bill Slocum, used to tell me, Catherine, if you can play that 10 times perfectly, you'll never miss it again. And then sometimes it was 20, and then sometimes it was 15. Have the student produce their own technique guide. Can you imagine? But I've done it. And they, with if-then statements. If I use too much pressure, then my tone's going to be very thin and pinched. If I play with the focused embouchure and good air support, then I'm going to play with a tone that I like better. That kind of thing really pushes their buttons. And follow a points system in grading. And, those of you who are not university teachers might think, now how am I going to do that with a high school student? With middle school students, some of my girls are absolutely enamored of stickers. Even though they're middle school kids, they really like pink sparkly stickers. And so I have a sticker book, and if they can do whatever, they get another sticker for their book, right? And so for a high school student, you could have little prizes that add up to something from the local music store. And then my university, you guys get a grade, so.
The Horn Call Podcast is the official podcast of the International Horn Society. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the International Horn Society. Copyright International Horn Society. Music by Brian K.M.